Created Equal, The Myth of the Melting Pot by Jasia and Anne Marie. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
White people.
Melting pot, a place where different peoples, styles, and theories are mixed together.
America has always been viewed as a melting pot. We are stereotypically seen as a place where different cultures, beliefs, and peoples blend together in a positive way.
But it hasn't always been that way.
If you smell something funny when you walk down the street, you're in Coontown. You look and see garbage all over the street, you're in Coontown. Up and down the street there ain't nothing but trash. Nigger girls trying to get a nigger boy's cash. Then you even see a spook with a big mustache in.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream. My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
In 2010, only 15% of all new marriages were interracial.
24% of blacks and 21% of Latinos, in contrast to 8% of whites, live in poverty. 18% of people of color, compared to 43% of whites, have retirement accounts.
From 2007 to 2010, the Native American unemployment rate rose nearly 8 percentage points to 15%, over 1.5 times the increase for white workers.
In 2011, there was 1,018 hate groups active in the United States, up from 926 in 2008. Some causes of prejudice. Scapegoating is a predominant characteristic of the sociopathic mindset. People who consider themselves above reproach will lash out at anyone who does not reproach them. They sacrifice others to preserve their own grandiose self-image. There have been many instances throughout world history of minority groups serving as scapegoats, including the Christians in ancient Rome, the Huguenots in France, the Jews in Europe and Russia, and the Puritans and Quakers in England. Irish, Italians, Catholics, Jews, Quakers, Mormons, Chinese, Japanese, blacks, Puerto Ricans, Mexicans, and Koreans have all been treated at one time or another as a scapegoat in the United States. Especially in times of economic hardship, societies tend to blame some group for the general conditions, which often leads to aggressive action against the group as an expression of frustration. People tend to be more hostile toward others when they feel their security is threatened. Evidence shows that negative stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination increases whenever competition for available jobs increases. In 1873, after the completion of the railroad and during an economic depression, there was a fight for jobs between the Chinese and the former Civil War soldiers. The Chinese became more frequent victims of open discrimination and hostility. Their positive stereotype among some whites was widely displaced by a negative one. They were now conniving, crafty, criminal, the Yellow Menace. The Chinese then retreated into Chinatowns and minimized their competition with whites. Throughout U.S. history, in times of high unemployment and thus intense job competition, nativist movements against minorities have flourished. To help you understand how norms might affect racism and prejudice in different areas, take a look at this picture of downtown Kansas City, which happens to be home to my favorite chicken joint, Go Chicken Go. And then take a look at this picture of these fine people from Oak Grove, Missouri, which is probably home to the KKK. Just kidding, I actually don't know where they're from, but you get the idea.
In general, people's prejudices should decrease or increase significantly when they move into areas where the prejudicial norm is different.
It's no doubt that whenever you travel to different areas, you'll find different levels of prejudice.
Thomas Jefferson is probably the best known author of the Declaration of Independence.
This is pretty ironic, because from what we picked up from the reading, he seems pretty racist.
Yeah, do you really think he thinks all men are created equal?
I don't think so. The passage reveals a very different side of his character. He did own slaves, you know.
In the passage, Jefferson talks about sending away slaves to form their own colonies to prevent interracial marriage between black and whites.
They astonish you with strokes of the most sublime oratory, such as to prove their reason and sentiment strong, their imagination growing and elevated. But never yet could I find that a black had uttered a thought above plain narration, never even saw an elementary trait of painting or sculpture.
I advance it, therefore, as suspicion only that not only the blacks, whether originally a distinct race or made distinct by the time or circumstance, are inferior to the whites in the endowments both body and mind.
The slave, when made free, might mix with without staining the blood of the master, but with us a second is necessary, unknown to history. When freed, he is to be removed beyond the reach of the mixture.
But didn't he sleep with the slaves in the slave house?
I think he did. That's pretty hypocritical of him.
Yeah. Their love is ardent, but it kindles the senses only, not the imagination.
Ugh, that's a lot of low blows there.
Well, it sure makes me feel better to know who wrote the Declaration of Independence.
It's also pretty ironic to note that Jefferson is seen as a champion of freedom and democracy. Civic leaders have named libraries, schools, and other public institutions after him for the last 200 years. Do you think this is appropriate? What do these images represent? What facts do they convey? We could say that the top image depicts a man who, in the aftermath of Katrina, is wading through high waters with food supplies and a big plastic bag. We might say that the bottom image depicts a man and a woman both wearing backpacks. They too are wading through high waters in the aftermath of Katrina, and the woman appears to be carrying food supplies. This is not, however, how these two images were presented in the press. The captions that appeared with the two photos, both of which ran on Yahoo News, were quite different. The caption for the top image read, "A young man walks through chest-deep floodwater after looting a grocery store in New Orleans." The caption for the bottom image read, "Two residents wade through chest-deep waters after finding bread and soda from a local grocery store after Hurricane Katrina came through the area." The caption for the top image then tells us that a crime has been committed. The caption for the bottom image tells us that a fierce struggle for survival is underway. The subjects have just found food. The top image depicts a young black man. The bottom image shows a white man and a woman. The images and their respective captions almost immediately stirred up significant controversy. People complained that the captions accompanying the images were racially suggestive. Black people loot and white people find. Not everyone agreed, however, that the images and captions reflected a racial problem. The most relevant and dominant frame is colorblindness, or the belief that race is not a factor in how we make sense of the world. At least initially, Katrina challenged the supremacy of colorblindness. The tidal wave of suffering that washed over New Orleans seemed unignorable evidence of the salience of race in contemporary U.S. society. The simple fact that the faces of those left behind to fend for themselves or die were overwhelmingly black raised questions about the explanatory power of colorblindness, under which race is deemed irrelevant. Racial suffering was everywhere, and black people were dying prime time live. Katrina raised a number of questions about racial inequality previously suppressed under colorblindness. Why were those New Orleans residents who remained trapped during Katrina largely black and poor? Was it, as hip-hop artist Kanye West argued, a case of presidential indifference to or dislike of poor black people? Or was it, as Ward Connerly asserted, the predictable consequence of a natural disaster that befell a city that just happened to be predominantly black? Was it, as Linda Chavez claimed, the result of a culture of dependency combined with local bureaucratic incompetence? Was race a factor in determining who survived and who did not? Or did class provide a better explanation? Finally, could we ever truly understand Katrina without meaningfully engaging the legacy of slavery? These and other similar questions were pushed into the foreground by the force of Katrina's devastation. Most whites were able to see black people as victims, but they were unwilling to link their victim status to race or racism. A more acceptable story was that black people in New Orleans suffered only because of bureaucratic insufficiencies in the wake of natural disaster. Race simply could not be a factor. Katrina then only partially destabilized the frame of colorblindness. Katrina was the frame of Law and Order, a racial script that permeated the debate over the iconic photographs in which we began our essay and over the post-Katrina relief efforts. The media were both author and reader of events in ways that both challenged and underwrote colorblindness.
Whether some people realize it or not, stereotypes we've heard about different races or minorities influence our subconscious thoughts and how we view people and the world.
#America.